Okay, round two. Name something that's not boring.
A laundry? Ooh, a book club. Computer solitaire, huh?
Ah, sorry, we were looking for Chumba Casino. That's right, ChumbaCasino.com has over 100 casino-style games. Join today and play for free for your chance to redeem some serious prizes. ChumbaCasino.com. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus. Terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
Every day, my company gets scam phishing emails trying to get money or sensitive info. I wanted to protect my employees and my clients, so I checked out CISA's Secure Our World. They've got simple ways we can protect our businesses from online threats. First, teach employees to recognize and report phishing. Next, require strong passwords plus multi-factor authentication. And finally, turn on automatic updates for your business software. To learn more, go to CISA at cisa.gov/Secure Our World.
All right. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the podcast. My name is Billy Dees. As always, I am absolutely thrilled that you are here. If you have never checked out our program before, we are primarily an interview and a commentary podcast. You can find the Billy Dees podcast pretty much anywhere podcasts are found. We have a great interview show for you today. Two people on the studio line. I'm going to start with Ananda. How are you doing today? Welcome to the program, Ananda.
Hello. Good evening, Billy. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. And also Zach. What is going on, Zach? Welcome to the program.
Thanks, Billy. I'm happy to be here.
Great. I'm going to talk about Ananda first. You can find Ananda on Twitter at AJInspire4 and then the word ever. So it's AJ Inspire Forever. And she is a Twitter Spaces host. And if you don't know what that is, we're going to talk about that a little bit. She specializes in curriculum and instruction leadership. This is according to her Twitter bio. She is a seeker of life-changing narratives and the universe's heartbeat. That's kind of cool. She's a yogi, which I hope I'm saying that correctly. That's actually a practitioner of yoga, if I have that correct. She also likes meditation. She's a lover of poetry, an entrepreneur. So she's got a lot of things going on. And Zach, you can find Zach on Twitter as well. And I didn't realize this until I was writing it out. It's Cats in the Hats. And I'm going to spell that for you. It's KATZINDAHATZ. Cats in the Hats. All right. You can find both of these individuals on Twitter, and you can find me on Twitter as well at Billy Dees. And then I'm going to start with you. Tell me just a little bit to give the audience a little background about you. What part of the world do you hail from?
All righty. I actually am in the U.S. and currently I'm in between New York and Florida, two places. And I'm originally from New York, from Brooklyn. And yeah, that's where I'm at. That's where I'm from.
You have a lot going on. I kind of mentioned some of the things in your bio here. You seem like one of these people that has a real, I guess, a humanitarian side. Would that be a good way to describe you?
Somewhat. Yeah, I consider myself to be a multifaceted being, but I think that humanitarian, why not? I'll accept that. Why not? To get into being a yogi a little bit.
Sure.
There's a book called Karma written by Sadhguru. And in this book, there's a quote, it's actually posted on my social media, where Sad states that being a yogi is not necessarily about being a practitioner, but it's about the inner condition of the individual, right? Yogi is about the inner condition. I am not a yoga instructor. I have been practicing yoga for over a decade. However, I am a certified Pilates instructor. I've been a certified Pilates instructor for over a decade, but I have been inactive for quite some time.
When did you start to realize that the way you described yourself there, when did you start to take on, at what point in your life, or were you always this way? When did you kind of have this, what's the word I'm looking for here? When you came together with some of these ideals that you have, when did that start to take shape? At what point in your life?
This may sound a little strange to some people, but I would have to say from when I was a really young age.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing how the universe works. And I was actually thinking about this today. Even with yoga, it was a gift that was given to me as a child.
Mm-hmm.
From a family member. I had a family member who used to practice yoga, and I learned it from my family member. And I've been reading. I started reading early in life. I've just been an avid reader for most of my life.
Okay.
And I've always been curious about psychology and the human condition and why people do the things that they do. I mean, obviously not as detailed as an adult would be, but I always had this innate curiosity about the world and life and the world and its parts and people and why people do the things that they do. So I think it's something that it really started to form very early in life. And as I had different experiences with people, and you learn more, right? You learn more through your interactions with others. You learn more in the classroom, and as I began to just fuse and merge the two, I think that's when everything came together. And getting into education, you really begin to understand how the brain works and the connection between the learning process and the human condition and the impact that mental health actually has on learning. And it's not even just learning on the part of the student or the person I would call the learner, even the instructor. Our emotional intelligence, our mental health, it even impacts our ability to engage in the learning process with someone else. And I prefer to call it a learning cycle because it's literally an exchange that occurs between constantly. It's this constant exchange of information, of output and input over a period of time.
That's interesting stuff. We're going to get into that a little deeper. And just to let the audience know, we're going to be talking a little bit about psychology today. We're going to be talking about mental health and a lot of other issues. And we are discussing these, anyway, from my perspective as the host of the show, we are going to be discussing them to raise awareness and a lot of other great things, and I always bring up stigma. We're going to talk about that a little bit today as well. But any of the things that you hear discussed on today's program is not a replacement for professional help if you need it. And there's no reason why you should not go out and get it. That's one of the reasons that we fight stigma so much in this industry, is because a lot of times people feel like they shouldn't access that kind of help, when in actuality, it's no different than if you fall and hurt your elbow, you go to the doctor. If you're hurt emotionally, you should get help. So we really want to stress that there's nothing stopping you from doing that. Speaking of mental health, Zach, you actually work in the field as well. Is that correct, Zach?
Correct. Yeah. I am a licensed mental health counselor. I'm licensed to practice therapy in Florida and New York at the time. And currently I practice with clients and patients that are based in New York.
Okay. Is there a particular field that you specialize in, or just mental health in general?
Not really. Generally, I see kind of all populations. My youngest client that I've worked with has been 6 years old. My oldest has been 67. I do individual therapy, family therapy, couples therapy. So I kind of do a little bit of everything. And, I guess some fields, some populations that I work with primarily now are actually young adults, really, and emerging adults. But when I started practicing therapy, I actually almost practiced exclusively with children.
from the background that you have, I spoke a little bit about stigma. Now you're in Florida, correct, at the moment?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Has stigma, since you've been in the field, has it gotten better? Because I actually work for a nonprofit that has mental health as one of its services. When I first started, a lot of people would get nervous when you would start talking about mental health. Everybody conjures up these images of Norman Bates, and I enjoyed the Psycho movies as much as anybody else, but it didn't do anything to help the image of what mental health issues are really like. The vast majority of people who suffer from mental health issues, as I'm sure you well know, are far more likely to be a victim of some kind than they are to be Norman Bates.
Mm-hmm.
Has the stigma around mental health gotten better from your perspective as a provider?
I think the stigma around mental health gets better as we educate people a little bit more. I'll be honest with you, when I first started graduate studies in mental health counseling, I think I actually held on to some stigma. And I had to really do a lot of work to reflect on that and to challenge it. And I think that's what I try to do in my work now. So I think that I have a lot of people who, if they are engaging in therapy, if they have engaged in therapy for a while, that stigma it exists, but it's not there as much. But a lot of clients that I have that, it's their first time in therapy, it's very difficult, and it's difficult to break that down and to break down that barrier. So I think, I think that mental health, though, it's more sort of in the limelight, like it's out there. And I still don't think we obviously look at it the same way as we do physical health. But I think that is sort of changing a little bit as a lot of, well-known figures and celebrities and politicians do put it out there, make it more of a public health issue. Sure.
And it most certainly is. Ananda, I know that you have, being a champion of these causes, it factors into your spaces a lot. Do you think that stigma, how would you describe the status of stigma right now regarding mental health?
Honestly, similar to what Zach mentioned, where as we're out and about in the world and, you may, especially in the workplace, you may encounter some people and you hear certain stories and things that people might say. It really makes you wonder and want to explore what, like, this thing called mental health and how does it impact most people on a daily basis. And to expound on what Zach shared, as far as educating people, that directly connects to the soul space and what we do, right? The soul space is really a space where we're educating people by sharing knowledge that relates to or in some way connects to mental health. And we overall encompass what is called our soul journey, right? Because in order to fulfill your assignment or your purpose in life, what do you need? You need a healthy, nutritious mind. So as far as the stigma with mental health, we have spaces on Twitter Spaces like the Soul Space in order to break those stigmas. And the only way that's going to happen is if people are educated and receive that knowledge. There's so many people out here who they're reluctant to reach out for help because, especially depending on the profession that you're in. As I stated, I am an educator. I'm in the education community. Well, right now I'm an administrator in education. And as an administrator in education, most people don't reach out and say, this is what I'm experiencing in my mental health, or this is what's going on with me. Yet we're trained to be able to identify certain things so that we can refer, to a guidance counselor or to whomever. So throughout my career, I've definitely managed to develop that passion to want to spread more awareness about mental health and the profound impact that it has on us fulfilling our assignment and purpose in life.
Yeah. Let's talk just a little bit. We don't need to go into the finer points of it, but just so the audience has a concept of it, because a lot of people do not know what spaces are. Okay. There's a new, I guess, type of media that is available now that's kind of loosely described as social audio. Clubhouse, for example, was a big one. And that one kind of, even though social audio has been around a while, it really rose to prominence during the pandemic because so many people were home. Twitter Spaces is very much like that. And what these are basically online audio forums and the formats of these vary, but you basically have a host, you have a number of speakers, around a dozen or so, and then you have as many people come in and listen as possible. And Twitter Spaces, I kind of feel, fits right in to what happens on Twitter because it's so trending. It's such a very active platform, and anything involving mental health, if you're an author and you're a writer or you're a musician, any of these types of things, you're an artist or whatever, those communities are already there. So it makes sense to have spaces on the same platform, which is Twitter, because a lot of those causes, a lot of those subjects are already there. And you have a Twitter space, and is there a particular time and day that you go with for your space?
Yes, typically our show airs either on Tuesdays or Thursdays. Because we have so many unique guests on our show, we do try our best to accommodate the schedule of our guests, but typically our show will air on Tuesdays or Thursdays between like 6 or 7 o'clock. The way people will know the dates and times of our spaces and the topics would be by following us on Twitter, looking at our pages, and we pretty much advertise whenever we're going to have a space, we advertise. And that's typically how people are able to find us when they're ready to receive that knowledge that they need for their mental health.
Zach, you join Ananda Spaces quite often. Is that correct?
Yeah, I've been a guest a number of times on Ananda's Spaces, and they're always really wonderful. And I think, when we're talking about stigma, and I think spaces like that are really, really important because Ananda's really great at sort of giving everyone a platform, and that's the people that are the guests, but also people that are just listeners in the audience. She's really amazing at making everyone's experience valid and having them heard, and having their experience seen. So that's what I've seen as a guest.
Yes, I would totally agree. I've listened to her spaces, and she's a very good host. She does a fantastic job. How did you two join forces?
So should I let you take that one, Ananda?
Ananda, go right ahead.
Thank you, Zach. Well, when I started Spaces and I knew exactly what the objective would be, I'm like, I need to, seek out some cutting edge, innovative mental health professionals who are open to sharing their knowledge and their expertise on a platform that's going to support health and wellness and all of these other wonderful things. And in doing my research, lo and behold, I actually came across one of Zach's mentors who then referred me to Zach. I did some research on Zach, and I have to say I was absolutely captivated by the information that I saw about him. And when I say captivated, Zach is actually a member of the National Association of Poetry Therapy. And yeah, it's a very interesting craft. And I would love for Zach to talk a little bit about that, because in the soul space, we also cover narrative healing and healing through the creative arts as well. We really educate on so many different topics in this whole space. But as a member of the National Association of Poetry Therapy, at one of their workshops, there's a workshop that Zach held that's titled Navigating the Multicultural Self. And when I had an opportunity to read about that workshop, which, Billy, if you don't mind, may I just share a little bit about that workshop with the audience? Awesome.
Go right ahead. Yes.
Well, this particular workshop, in the description, it states, through the use of narrative, metaphor, spoken word, and performance techniques, participants will examine aspects of their cultural identity in order to understand how culture, background, and lifestyle has shaped who they are today. This workshop will allow free expression of one's multicultural self in order to embrace diversity, promote unity among all individuals, and spark dialogue on how reflection of identity can bring individuals toward growth and empowerment.
That's quite the mission. Zach, in regard to the therapy by poetry, I know that there's a lot of arts that are incorporated in some sort of recovery now. There's the art the way we normally consider it, drawing pictures and so on and so forth. Recently, I just found out about incorporating drama, and acting out things. That's another one. So tell me a little bit how the poetry works.
Yeah. Well, so there's a model of poetry therapy that was sort of really developed by someone named Nick Mazza, who is actually the president right now of the National Association of Poetry Therapy. And poetry therapy is supposed to, the theory involves three main components called the receptive, the expressive, and the symbolic. And the receptive is basically, you'll have a therapist that reads a poem out loud, right? And then encourages the client to react to it, either verbally, non-verbally, or both. And there might be even a prompt, right? So the therapist might say, I noticed that you laughed at this line. What was happening for you? Or, was there anything you particularly resonated with? Was there anything that made you angry? Something like that, right? And then there's another element, which is like the expressive or the creative, which this is actually writing, right? And it's sort of like promoting someone to maybe to journal or to write out stream of consciousness, something that sort of may aid in emotions that might be latent or they might be repressed, serve to retrieve memories, right? Or to unravel meaning, right? Things like that. So a therapist might offer a prompt to get started. And then there's the symbolic, which is just using metaphors, in our lives, using metaphors to describe things that might be really hard to describe in a literal sense. And so in the workshops that I've developed, and that I've ran a few workshops for the conference for the National Association for Poetry Therapy. And I also ran some workshops privately, during the lockdowns. I, had some people attended, and I've used all of these components, to work through a theme. Sometimes it's, resolving doubt or searching through our identity or on discovering and navigating the multicultural self. But I think we use these all the time. It's not necessarily poetry. We don't look at it as that, but we use these all the time, like metaphor. We always describe things in metaphor. I used to use that a lot when I worked with younger kids, to get them to describe difficult cognitions or feelings, and it was always very fun. I always liked that. Like I worked with this kid. I have a poem about this actually, because I'm a poet as well, but I worked with a few kids and they would, one girl, she described her parents' divorce and we were trying to really like navigate it and how she felt. And we used art and all of these symbols and, and she was able to say that like, sometimes it feels like swallowing an ice cube. Right? And I thought that was so profound, right? Yeah. There was so much like wisdom in that, right? Because like that idea of that it's really cold and uncomfortable, but also it melts, right? And so then you can digest it, you know what I mean?
Sure.
And these metaphors like that are really powerful. And then there was another kid that, he would struggle with anger. And he said that, sometimes just when he was in school and he didn't get to say certain things, it was sort of like holding in a fart, right? And just these things like that. And that's actually a component of poetry therapy, which is really great.
I really like this stuff, and I enjoy hearing it from people like both of you who are so passionate about this. This really isn't a stigma, but maybe it's a perception. A lot of times people consider anything with mental health, like the old pictures you used to see on the wall of somebody laying on a couch, and then the therapist is sitting next to him, and they're asking, "Well, what do you think?" But it's so much more than that. All the things that you guys are talking about is just amazing about how you can get people to open up about how they feel. I find that really amazing. Let me go to Ananda on this. We touched on it earlier. Your I guess impressions, or I know that as a humanitarian, it's bigger than that. Your place in the universe. You talk a lot about the universe's heartbeat, and another thing you talk about is life-changing narratives. And that's kind of what I just touched upon about how we view therapy and how we view mental health help. How does your vision, in terms of your awareness is probably a good word, your self-awareness and your awareness of our world. And our world doesn't necessarily stop at the top of the atmosphere, right? It goes on into the universe. How does your perspective of that fold into your passion for mental health, and with all these things that you do to talk about, people getting in touch with themselves?
Well, that is definitely a multi-layered question, Billy. Thank you.
Okay. Well, you can give a multi-layered answer.
I will. Well, I guess I will start with the most recent space that we've held, right? Mm-hmm. So, for example, we held a space about men's mental health, right? What prompted me to unpack that and explore that in the soul space is research that I conducted for a previous space on, self-harm and self-harm awareness. And in looking at the numbers, I found them to be it was very emotional for me. Mm-hmm. As a woman, and I use a lot of my own experiences to navigate through topics that we're going to cover on the show. And with our most current show on men's mental health, where Zach, is the therapist who was there to really help us explore and navigate through men's mental health awareness and that topic, I would have to say that we utilize those spaces to, once again, educate people and give them the knowledge that they need. Social media is just such an amazing platform it's so much so that you meet people. Like, I've met people from India and from New Zealand. I've actually had guests on our show from India and New Zealand. And when you're utilizing a space like Twitter Spaces in order to educate, it's just so impactful how you can take those different things that you're curious about, that same childlike curiosity that we talked about at the beginning of the interview that I have now. It still exists, and it exists daily. So as I'm moving throughout my life every single day, and this is where my yoga comes in, where it's through yoga where my consciousness is deepened, my ability to see the world and identify patterns in the world and understand what is going on within and outside of me, it informs me as to what direction I would like to take the show in, along with that more practical approach where you're utilizing actual data, right? Recent data. So I hope I'm answering your question here, Billy, because that was definitely a multi-layered one. But, if you're asking like, how do I navigate through topics and things of that nature? It's just through the experiences that I have on a daily basis. And it's just so amazing how, and I know for some people out there who might be listening, they're like, this is just a little too much for me. But real talk, it's amazing how the universe always lines things up so that, the topic, it aligns with the speaker, it aligns with the listeners. I mean, there were so many listeners in that space who just kept saying, this is just so timely because most men, don't really have a space like this to talk about their feelings.
Yeah.
And I found that to be highly impactful for me, at least. I hope I answered your question, Billy.
Yes. And, it's a topic that I'm sure you could talk about for a very long time. And this is the kind of subject matter that people can find on your space. Let's stay with the topic of men just a little bit. I'm going to throw this both at you. And I'm going to try to be a little entertaining. I'll try to be a little humorous here, but you're going to try and hopefully you'll get my point.
Okay.
There's, I feel right now that men are getting pulled in two directions. The one is that the alpha male, the big, strong guy, the masculine guy, that's toxic. There's toxic masculinity over here. Okay. And then on the other side, we have to have the sensitive guy. We have the guy that understands, everybody's feelings and, can cry and do all these other kind of things. Okay. First of all, my first question is, can these two things coexist? Can you be, and I believe they can. I believe you can be one of the most beautiful things in the world, in my opinion, is a big, strong, assertive guy who knows when to be sensitive. To me, that's a beautiful thing. I'll throw to you guys on that. And the next thing I'm going to say is I kind of feel that men are confused about what is expected of them. Because let's say, for example, and when I say you, I don't mean you personally, but I just mean you in general. If you and your partner are in bed at 2:00 in the morning and you hear a window break downstairs, do you want a sensitive guy who's going to hand you the phone and say, call 911 and put his head under the covers? Or do you want to be in bed with John Wick? Okay. And he's going to say, I'll be right back. Somebody's going to die. Okay. And in all honesty, I want to be in that situation. I want to be with John Wick. Okay. And I'm a man. I think that there's something, that is very comforting about that type of man in that type of situation. But that has been villainized lately, and and some of it has merit. I come from a very active football area. I mean, I'm in the area of the Professional Football Hall of Fame, the Ohio State Buckeyes, the Cleveland Browns, and high school football here gets incredible crowds. Okay. And this is a very fertile area. I could tell you a lot of names that are pro legends that came from this area. And I can tell you, too, that a lot of kids, and me being one of them, were pressured to play football because that's what guys around here, that's what boys do. And I really wasn't that enthusiastic about playing. And I can tell you other horror stories about young boys and young men feeling compelled to play hurt. And we know now about concussions. A lot of them were told to play through concussions before people knew about the dangers of that. So I understand both sides. I understand there is a danger to toxic masculinity, but by the same time, when something goes bump in the night, whether you want to admit it or not, we want John Wick, right? So how I'll start with Zach on this because I was with Ananda earlier. Zach, how is this balancing act playing out?
Billy, I think that sometimes we don't let people just be people.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is maybe we don't have to call it the masculine guy or the feminine guy or whatever. I think sometimes we should just let people be people, let people do what they like, let them explore their interests, and maybe not put expectations or labels on those things, and let them explore and live their identity. Right. And whatever it is, that's great. I have one of my, closest friends. I think I was thinking of him when you were speaking about this. He's the complete intersection of everything that you're talking about. Mm-hmm. He in college, he was a frat guy, but he also did musical theater. And it was the coolest. I think he's the coolest person ever for all of that.
Oh, yeah.
He just did what he wanted to do.
Yes.
And people on both sides maybe could say that that's weird, right? Or tease him or taunt him, but he did what he wanted to do. And he was who he was. So I think it's possible. Are we going to have criticism? Sure. Right. Mm-hmm. But I think there's some strength in just following whatever feels right. And I think we should just let people be people.
Yeah. That's a good answer. And then what is your take on that?
I love the fact, Billy, that you brought up that there's this confusion that a number of men are experiencing in regard to their identity and, who they should be, how they should be, and how they should act. Because one of the guests on our show, or one of the listeners on our show, at Noble Ron, I just want a quick shout out. Hey, Noble Ron, if you're listening, actually posted just a very moving post for the show. And I'm going to go ahead and just read. I thought this was so powerful.
Sure.
Where there were some questions that were posed during the space, and Ron actually posted them for us, where, it was mentioned, these questions were put out there. Okay, what is required of me as a man? What does my role entail? How can I be a man but still show all women the equality they deserve? And what you just spoke of earlier about this confusion, and there was even one guest who shared that, he felt that sometimes that it's like with seasons, like 1 minute there's one set of qualities or characteristics that define what a man is, and then the next minute it completely changes. Mm-hmm. So that's why with spaces like Soul Space, in encountering topics like men's mental health, we like to create that platform so that people can be in a safe space and talk about these issues. It's absolutely just mind-boggling when you read the data about, men, and how a number of men, I believe, and please don't quote me on this, I don't have my notes in front of me right now,
sure.
but I think it was just 1 in 4 men don't feel comfortable about, or is it 1 in 4 men feel comfortable talking about their emotions or feelings? There was some data that I had collected in regard to men and sharing their feelings. And it's just, we look at everything that's going on right now in the world, and so many people are engaging in so many things. And it's like, you know what? With all of this confusion and with all of this noise that's going on in the world right now, both metaphorically and literally, I could see how some people get to their breaking point, and once again, if anyone were to, please make sure that you reach out for help. There are so many resources out there that you can look into if you feel like you're about to get to that point where you just cannot do it on your own anymore.
Yes, absolutely. There's a lot of ways. That's one of the good things about some of the awareness that has risen so highly, depending on what area of the world you're in. In the United States, for example, there's the NAMI organization, which may or may not be able to help you directly, but at least they can point you in the right direction. There is the new suicide hotline, which is 988. Okay. So, don't ever let yourself get to the point where you feel that there's no place to turn, and also trust the people around you. A lot of times give certain people that are in your circle a little bit more credit. And I would also have to say here again, just me personally, I'm always very aware of little comments that seem a little off. And maybe I'll go to you on this, Zach. We talk a lot more about suicide awareness now. We always preach that it's better to say something. A lot of times people are afraid to say something because they're afraid they might extend the idea of suicide in someone's mind who is considering it, when every study that's been done says that's exactly the opposite. You never know what the outcome is going to be, but saying nothing is so much worse. And a lot of times just showing an active interest, saying, hey, I'm not exactly sure what you meant by that. Are you doing okay? You need to talk. That can save someone's life. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, Zach?
Yeah, you're right. And the hardest thing is also to say nothing, right? And we talk about men's mental health. Sometimes they feel like they have no choice but to say nothing. They have no space, right? And I think just as people, not even as mental health professionals or whatever, the best thing that we can do is just ask, not even to say anything, but to ask questions, right? To give people platforms, to show that they're not alone, right? And you mentioned NAMI, right? And one thing that's great, we're talking about having these spaces and these, platforms where people can listen and be heard, but also like NAMI is a great resource because they have all of these groups for different things, right? For, different populations, different issues. There's substance use groups. There's, things about getting support with a family member that suffers from mental illness or something. They have all of these groups on that you can just join online through Zoom, through other platforms. And, I mention that because to provide people with some spaces and to ask questions is so important. And sometimes you're right. People might we're afraid that people might react, and they might, be offended and maybe they won't talk to us, but it's the best thing that we can do because at least we know that we did it. And if people don't maybe respond to it the way that we would like, maybe they did hear us. Maybe we lay some seeds and maybe they get to a place that they're ready to then reach out and ask for help, but we laid some seeds. And
absolutely. Yes. And here again, that's another thing that we hear. Well, they might be offended. What do you mean you think there's something wrong with me? Well, you know what? If they get offended, that's a lot better than, having some catastrophe happen and second guess the fact that you should have said something. Ananda, what's your input on this? I'd be anxious to hear your follow up to that.
As I always say, go with your gut instinct. And this is why it is so important, and I cannot stress this enough, if you're able to create those connections and those relationships in real life so that there are people around you who are able to identify when something is off, and for those people out there, I don't take it for granted that, not everyone has the ability to form those healthy, safe relationships with people in real life.
Yes.
I've been in so many spaces, on Twitter spaces, where people literally will come right out and say that. And once again, this goes back to what Zach mentioned, where at least with spaces like Soul Space and other spaces out there on Twitter spaces, people still have that anonymity, where they don't have to worry about being judged. So it's more like a judgment-free zone. And when it comes to just that temperature check, if you don't have someone in real life who's there to determine maybe I need to pour into this person, absolutely we need platforms like Twitter Spaces where people are able to get into a safe environment where they can connect with people who may be going through the same thing as them or somewhat of the same thing. And I love the fact that questioning, that term questioning was utilized in this conversation because you know what? And as a this is what I do for a living. I teach people how to question so that they're able to improve their instructional performance, especially when you're dealing with adult education or you're dealing with adults in general. Sometimes it's not about telling someone something is wrong with them, right? Because just like what you mentioned, Bill, most people will respond and say, there's nothing wrong with me, but there's something wrong with you for implying that, right?
Right. Sure.
Even though I agree with you and I say, still ask because you never know, it's that questioning piece. And Zach even mentioned that earlier in the conversation about poetry therapy, which is why I love it. I love it so much because it's like you're developing the ability to question in a manner in which it gets people to think. And when a lot of people attend these spaces just as a listener, they don't even have to be a speaker, but you're just listening. What does it allow you to do? Question. Judgment-free questioning.
Yes.
So absolutely. I definitely, what was just stated absolutely resonates with me because that's where it all starts. Just someone asking if you're okay. Right. But sometimes, and when you go to these spaces, they'll ask other questions as well that may allow someone to be less defensive when it comes to working on themselves and their own self-healing.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I would encourage people who come to listen to Soul Space, just because it is social audio and just because other people, in the space might come up and talk does not mean that you need to come up and talk. Sometimes just listening, you affect the space. And it's certainly, here again, it might jar something in you. And even though you feel well, I consider myself, a relatively well-balanced person. But a lot of times when I listen to a space like what Ananda has, I'll hear things and I'm honest with myself and say, you know what, I do have a problem with that. Maybe I should, focus a little bit more on that. So that's a great aspect to your space. And the other thing I just wanted to follow up on, when I say trust the people around you a little bit more, I don't know how many times I've had somebody tell me something like, I'll ask them, well, why didn't you come and talk to me? They'll say, well, you've never been divorced. So you can't even imagine what I've been through. And I'm not so sure that that's always the case. In my personal opinion, if someone is around you and they have an empathetic heart, that's the important part. Just because somebody has had the same experience as you doesn't mean they're going to care about you going through the same journey. They may not have that empathy, even though they've been down the same road you have. That's not necessarily the final determining factor, in my opinion. If you have an empathetic heart, and, I don't know what it's like to walk on the moon, but I know it's damn hard to breathe up there. And I can certainly understand somebody that's coming to me with some sort of a problem that's impacting them. Just because I haven't been exactly in that spot doesn't mean I can't relate to their pain. I can't relate to their frustration. And I might not have a solution for them, but I am there to listen. And that can mean so much. That's why I kind of say that. Would you agree with that? I'll start with you, Zach. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. Yeah. And, like as a therapist also, and also I used to be a teacher as well, but, plenty of people have said to me, well, you don't know what I feel. You haven't experienced what I feel. You don't know me. And I say, you're right. I don't know you. All I know is myself. Right. And you know yourself too. So help me understand. Right. And it's just about helping each other to understand.
Yeah.
And I think that, it related to what we were talking about before, asking these questions, right? Audre Lorde, who was a great poet, writer, civil rights activist, she had this saying, your silence will not protect you. And she talks about how people are always fearful to maybe ask questions or to speak up. And there's a really great quote that she has. And she says, when we speak, we're afraid our words will not be heard or welcome. But when we are silent, we are still afraid. So it is better to speak. Right.
Interesting. Love that. Ananda, I want to throw back to you on this. An empathetic heart, which I'm going to say you're probably going to agree with me on this, but that's where it's really at. If you can find a spirit that is around you that can take in what you have to say, whether they've been down that exact road or not. That's what's important.
Absolutely, I agree. And something that was mentioned, I just want to quickly just go back to something that Zach had stated. One of the things that I love about having Zach on the show is that his level of objectivity when he shares in the soul space, I really believe that it allows our guests, our listeners, to be at ease.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I like the fact that he demonstrates that, because it's my desire that the other people who are in there will notice that and will observe that and will actually model that, right? I love the fact that he's very deliberate about it, you know, when he explains things. And I would encourage anyone out there, when it comes to being in dialogue with someone or building relationships with other people, that, and we know that there are different types of relationships, right? But when you're really forming close bonds with people, right, you want someone to be comfortable enough to trust you, right? A lot of that has to do with, like what you stated, Bill, having that empathetic heart. And also what I feel Zach offers the Soul Space audience would be that level of objectivity. And something else that I wanted to share in connecting with when you talked a little bit about someone stating, you know, well, you've never been through a divorce, so you don't really know what I'm going through, right? This goes back to the soul space and how we do explore the way narrative is an extremely important part of our healing journey and our soul journey, right? And in the soul space, you know, people share their stories. I love having, you know, mental health professionals in the soul space who have that background where they have those applicable experiences and narratives that they're able to share with our listeners to connect with them as well, right? But I think that when we're getting into something like divorce or bereavement, right? A loved one, you know, transitioning to the other side, or whatever the case might be, one thing we all have in common as far as the human condition is concerned is our pain. We all understand disappointment. And I would encourage anyone out there, you know, if you're going through something and you are sharing that experience with another person, or let's just say you don't want to share because you feel as if no one else understands you, I would encourage you to challenge yourself. Because, and this is why I find I just have this profound curiosity about the human experience and what we go through emotionally and spiritually daily as beings. And if there's one thing that we've all encountered in some way, shape, or form, it's grief. It is loss. It is disappointment. It is love. It is expectation. It is hope. It is desire. We've all experienced these things at some point in our lives. So whether someone's been through a divorce or has experienced what it's like to lose a loved one, please know that whatever it might be, you know, whether someone's struggling financially or you're dealing with a health crisis or a health issue, know that we all know at some level what disappointment and pain and what love and happiness and joy, we all have experienced this at some level in our lives. So please, for anyone out there listening, never let that prevent you from sharing. Obviously, please make sure you're sharing with someone you can trust, someone you can confide in, you know, but never let that prevent you from freeing yourself. And Zach, that was just such a beautiful quote that you shared, right? By Audre Lorde, just an amazing poetess. You know, your silence will not protect you. It will not save you, right? People suffer, right? Suffer in silence. And even that sound on the S, right? Suffer in silence. You know, it's just, don't do it. It's not worth it. You only get one life. So make sure that you live it to its full.
That is an absolute fantastic message. And I got to say, both of you, even if someone is not necessarily directly interested in the issue of mental health in and of and by itself, you two have such a great energy. It's just so pleasant to listen to you. And you have the right combination of a good energy. A lot of people have a good energy, but they don't really say anything of substance. And sometimes it's the other way around. Some people talk a good game, but the weight of their soul just isn't there. You guys have it both. And to me, there's so many good reasons just to listen to you two on the spaces and stuff. Boy, it's been an absolute joy to talk to both of you. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much. It was really great to be here.
Yeah, and yes, thank you so much for having us, Billy. And now, is it possible for me to share something very quickly before we begin to wind it down?
Absolutely. Go right ahead.
Thank you. I just want to thank you and Zach very much for just mentioning the temperature that you feel, the climate of the soul space. And one of our goals, I would have to say our mission statement would be to create a safe space where souls feel seen, heard, acknowledged, valued, and inspired. And the feedback that you both provided, it really blesses me and it fills my heart, because that is one of the mission. That is like our statement. Like, that's what I want for every guest and every listener who joins our show. And I just also wanted to thank our listeners as well. On the Soul Space, we were nominated by the Global Interview for an award in social audio. So I just really wanted to thank our listeners or whoever. And for anyone who really may, you might be an avid follower of the Soul Space, or as I like to call everyone, just a member of the Soul Space fam. The vote for this particular award, it closes on this Friday, October 28th. So if you're able to, please make sure that, you support us. We love you guys. And I just want to thank you very much for your support, because I never would have thought that I would have been, nominated for something like that. So I just want to thank you all.
Well, I can certainly understand why you are, because you're a wonderful person to talk to, and Zach, you are too. I'm going to say your Twitter screen names one more time. I'll start with Zach, and if you have a better way of communicating this, please feel free to do so. But it's with a K, Cats, and that's with a Z, in the hats, and also ending with a Z. So it's KATZ. INDAHATZ. And for Ananda, her Twitter screen name is at AJ Inspire numeral 4 ever, EVER. So it's at AJ Inspire 4 ever. Thank you so much, both of you, for being on the podcast. It's been just an absolute delight to have both of you.
Thank you, Bill.
Thanks so much.
You are very welcome. A reminder to the audience, you can also follow me on Twitter at Billy D's. Real easy to find on Twitter. And I always get comments about how people find this podcast. I'm on a lot of platforms I'm not even aware of. So if you have happened to stumble across the podcast, first of all, I'm so glad that you found us. And you can find us on just about any of your favorite podcasting platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and with friends over at Good Pods. Thank you very much for listening to our podcast today. I'm Billy Dees. Have a great week. I'm Billy Dees and host of the self-titled podcast, The Billy Dees Podcast. We are primarily an interview and a commentary-based podcast featuring authors and creators talking about their craft, advocates for community issues, and myself and an array of co-hosts discussing current events. There's no partisan ranting and raving going on here, just great content. You can find the Billy Dees Podcast on your favorite platform and on Twitter at Billy Dees. Thank you, and I hope you listen in.
Okay, round two. Name something that's not boring.
A laundry? Ooh, a book club. Computer solitaire, huh?
Ah, sorry, we were looking for Chumba Casino. That's right, ChumbaCasino.com has over 100 casino-style games. Join today and play for free for your chance to redeem some serious prizes. ChumbaCasino.com. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus. Terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
O'Reilly! It's Superstart Battery Month at O'Reilly Auto Parts. Get up to a $25 gift card after rebate with the purchase of select Superstart batteries. Our professional parts people will test your old battery for free and recommend the right battery for your vehicle. For power, performance, and reliability, choose Superstart batteries only at O'Reilly Auto Parts.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.